I'm going to start this video by saying that as much as I love the Karambit, it is my least favorite tactical option as it relates to martial weaponry. I'm doing this video as a result of one of my subscribers, Tungsten Seabass. Thank you for leaving the comment on my recent video where I show the entire Estacado knife collection, and you left the comment saying, please do more Karambits. Thank you for the engagement. I'm happy to do this video for you. The Karambit is a very, very big subject because it has a lot of design aspects that make it very innovative, and there's a lot of things in terms of methodology that we have to discuss. So I'm going to be doing hub content on this, but let's use this video as a bit of an overview. First of all, on what I think works, what I think doesn't work, and ultimately, please give me the opportunity to share with you how I like to move with it. So the Karambit is a tool that is very prevalent in Southeast Asia, but we're going to focus a little bit on Indonesia and the Philippines because the most prevalent methodologies in the use of the Karambit really comes from Filipino Kali, Filipino martial arts, and Indonesian Silat. In Indonesia, the Karambit is in fact considered a farm tool, and it is very prevalent there, and you see it a lot in Indonesian Silat. It is one of the important weapons that they have. In Filipino Kali, you see it, but you don't necessarily see it as prevalent. What you see as the prevalent tools in Filipino Kali, if we're talking about edged weaponry in the more traditional sense, yes, you see the sword a lot, you see a barong, you see a kris, you even see a talibong or a ginunting. But if we're talking knives, we're really talking about just one Filipino knife design, and that happens to be the Filipino balisong. If we're talking edge weapons, and we're talking Filipino edge weapons, and we're talking knives, there's only one. It's the Filipino balisong. We do see the Karambit show up in Filipino methodology. So when I talk about it from a tactical, training, movement, and paradigm perspective, we're going to be talking specifically about Filipino Kali, and we're going to be talking about Indonesian Silat. So, first of all, I love the Karambit. Absolutely love the Karambit. There are just so many things about it that I love. One of the important design inspirations of Karambits is the tiger claw. In fact, the cold steel Karambit, folding Karambit, is called tiger claw. So when we think of it from a design perspective, it's really from a catching perspective. So as much as I love it, I just love the design for many reasons, there's also a lot of reasons, and the tiger claw being one of them, why it is also my least favorite design. When we're looking at it from an Indonesian and a Filipino perspective, I'm going to say this in a very generalized way. That way we can get the broader appreciation of the tactical implementation of this tool. And this is what those broad definitions are. If you ever take a look at any of the Filipino Kali implementation of the Karambit, notice that it is from a standing perspective. So what I'm going to use right now is the MTech Karambit. This is my chopping wood Karambit, right? So when I practice on hard targets, this is my hard target tool. So what you see in most Filipino Kali implementation of the Karambit is always from upper body to upper body control. Meaning, Filipino Kali practitioners tend to use the hubad pattern, the sinawali pattern, to occupy center line. And you start to see, notice my arm crosses the midline. So imagine a line coming down my body that bisects it from left to right. And this line, if you notice, the Karambit goes across that line. It goes across this line. This is the Sinawali pattern that Kuya Doug Marcaida mentions in my interaction with him at the Blade Show. And I loved how he put it, that this is actually a two-handed Sinawali pattern. But this is from a standing position. You won't necessarily see, in a very prevalent manner, the use of the Karambit in Filipino Kali where it is anything other than upper body to upper body. In other words, this is the use of the Karambit as a knife. meaning the karambit knife is being used from a standing perspective. So that's what you are looking at with the Filipino Kali karambit. What I've seen in the use of Indonesian Silat, and again, not saying that Indonesian Silat doesn't have upper body to upper body use of the karambit, you certainly do. But what you start to see in Indonesian Silat, and this is something I really like about it, is the use of the karambit in upper body to lower body control. In Indonesian Silat, this is where you start to see level changes. And that's where I really start to appreciate the karambit, because the use of the karambit in Indonesian Silat really likes to target the medial aspect of the knee to sever the tendons along the gracilis and sartorius so that the person all of a sudden cannot walk. And if they cannot walk, when you use the karambit on them, hey, they're not going to do you much harm. There is another target that really makes the karambit a very dangerous tool, and we are talking about the perineum. Just behind the testicles and just in front of the anus, that's where it is. This is a target of the karambit from upper body to upper body interactions, but also upper body to lower body interactions. That's why you see acrobatic and somewhat unrealistic looking body positions when you see a Silat practitioner all of a sudden dive to a level change and completely sprawled out, and all of a sudden you're thinking, what gives? Why are you doing that? Because what they're going for is the use of the karambit, and all of a sudden coming up to that perineum. Really nasty stuff. So what I'm going to cover in today's video is how the Filipino paradigm, which is upper body to upper body, and then the Indonesian paradigm, which is upper body to lower body, targeting of the perineum and the medial aspect of the knee, actually illustrates the true tactical advantage of the karambit. So Rolando, why is this your least favorite knife? Well, there's a couple of reasons for it. One, based off of the feedback I've got from people on the field, it is not their favorite tool either, because you give up the most important advantage of having a knife. And what we're talking about is range. Whenever you pull out a knife, your primary advantage is not the edge, it's not the tip, it's the range that it gives you. And as you can see, you give up a substantial amount of range whether you're carrying a small karambit or a big karambit. This makes it very clear that you give up the most important advantage of having a knife. You give up range. Why carry a knife? Number two, in my own testing, I did a testing video several years ago for a closed instructor group on the comparison cutting capabilities of a karambit and a straight edge knife. And the knife that I used for that was actually a Randall Trailblazer. And it was a very interesting video because it's very easy to take a look at edge weapons. If you take a look at anatomical gel, like the one used by Tomas at the Blade Show, that's actually pretty interesting because, of course, if you take any edged weapon and use it on gel, it's going to perform really well. But my testing from several years ago had nothing to do with gel, because obviously if you have something sharp and pointy, it's going to go through a soft target. If you have to use it within a self-defense or combative context, have to deal with material that that individual happens to be using. The body armor, their weapons, God forbid, their Lululemon athleisure. The karambit, although doing pretty well when it came to the use on soft targets, tended to catch on soft fabric. This is a problem because you lose a lot of timing if you're having to use it on soft material. I lost a lot of my timing. In fact, when I was trying to do a pattern on it, I couldn't fulfill the pattern that I would do when I would do like a chopping wood pattern, something like this. So if I go to a tree at my family's Connecticut home, and I go, wah, bah, 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 I do one of these, I can't actually do it if I'm using a soft body gel target with a shirt on it. So even a simple shirt, I was getting caught, so I couldn't do anything with it. If I used just a regular knife, so let's take a look at a bulisong, I was able to do very easy fluid movements. and I was able to go through it very easily. There were no losses in timing. There were no changes in beat structure. So there was a lot that I discovered in that all of a sudden made me think, from a tactical perspective, it's not a very good tool. There's another reason why I did not like it. So I'm not going to get into the details of it. Every now and then I get a video that says, hey, check this out. And a lot of times it has something to do with some sort of violent interaction. And this video that I received actually happened in my own backyard. So this is in Manhattan. I believe this was a video that was shot somewhere near Grand Central Station. And what ended up happening was there was a knife fight that broke out in, of all places, somewhere near Grand Central Station. And what ended up happening was that one person pulled out a knife and held it in an ice pick fashion, and he had a backpack with him. So what he ended up doing was pulling out this knife, and he was holding it in his backpack, and he was using the backpack as a shield. So he was doing this movement. Then the other fella that he was fighting with yanks out a karambit and does this. And I don't know how it happened so fast, but the karambit guy held his position like this. Ice pick bro all of a sudden does a backpack movement, lunges, and does an ice pick. Like a classic angle #1. But not from out here, but really super short, boom. And he nails the karambit guy right on his forearm. And I don't know what he ended up severing, but all of a sudden, karambit guy's hand went from here to here. So he had a grip. He still had this grip, but he could still hold the karambit, but he had lost all control of his hand. Then strangely, what he did was switch to the other hand. And then Ice Pick guy just kept going at him. And he was so confused by what happened to his hand that he just ran for it. So when I did further analysis of the video, if we were to compare the knives, even from an ice pick perspective, you can see that you're giving up almost 4 inches in length in terms of use. That 4 inches was enough so that Ice Pick Bro was able to close the gap and able to, in the same exact range and the same exact beat structure, sever a part of the karambit guy's anatomy so that he had no use of his arm. This is a non-starter for the karambit. Whether you hold it in the traditional manner, this way, or you hold it in this manner, all you need is somebody to come in with a knife just like this, and all of a sudden your karambit loses way too many advantages. Although I love the karambit, it is not my favorite because it gives up the very advantage that it purports to have, that it is a knife. It doesn't behave like a knife. Why do I love the karambit? Because in my opinion, the karambit is the one-edged weapon that really synthesizes Filipino Kali and Indonesian Silat biomechanics, so that as a practitioner, as someone who wants to have a better understanding and appreciation of these two phenomenal Southeast Asian martial arts, there is no better tool to put everything together than the karambit. I started to understand what these movements were in Silat when all of a sudden you put a karambit in that person's hand. If I'm moving like this and all of a sudden, you see how my hand opens this way? So the reason why the hand opens this way, because all of a sudden I can flip it over. Then the hand opens again so that I can re-grip. It is such a versatile and innovative tool because these movements allow for all these other capabilities of the karambit. #2, if you take a look at the MTech design, there's a brass knuckle at the end of that. So I can actually punch with this knife, which is something that you can't necessarily do with your regular knives. #3, take a look at that puño. That is your puño. #4, this is a compact ginunting. So if you're doing any of these kinds of movements and you're holding it this way, whoa, that is one heck of a tool that helps me to understand what the sinawali movements are. what the gunting movements are, like from elbow hubad or just regular hubad. So the karambit as a training tool to help me dive into the deeper concepts that marries both Indonesian silat and traditional Filipino kali. Nothing marries those two paradigms together better than the karambit. Some final thoughts on it before I go ahead and move with it is that the American karambit style, specifically the Demko designed cold steel tiger claw, one of my favorites. In fact, I think it is my favorite karambit design. I want you to notice the difference in terms of the traditional, more traditional design, where you see that point, you see how if I hold it this way, it's almost like I can punch with it. It's almost designed like a sickle. You see that, right? So if you take a look at the karambit style, I would almost say the American style of karambits, notice it's a little bit more like a Warncliffe design and a Ginunting design. So although you give up a lot in terms of that initial reach, because now that tip is pointing up here where the traditional kind of points this way. What I like about this is when I've had to break down all types of material for moves or just doing declutters, nothing works better than the Warncliffe design. When we consider the karambit, note that the kind of karambit that we're seeing mostly in the American market is really a little more inspired by the Ginunting and a little more inspired by the Warncliffe design. So there's so much to cover with the karambit. I'm going to do several videos on it. But for today, I'm going to show how I like to move with it. And I'm going to show what the Indonesian paradigm is and what the Filipino paradigm is as it relates to the use of this fantastic weapon, the karambit. I really hope you enjoy this video and thank you for letting me share.
The first karambit I'm going to be working with is the fixed Schrade double-edged karambit. Now it's double-edged, so it's going to be a little trickier and a little more risky to work with. So if you're looking to do any of these movements and looking to learn to use the karambit, make sure that you find an instructor to work with, but also do not go straight to a sharpened karambit. You got to use a trainer first. I'm using it because I've worked with it for a long time and I just happen to be an instructor. That's what I'm going to be using for the demo. So notice that it has a lot of versatility in terms of its grip transitions. It can go from a push dagger position to the conventional puño P-call grip, and I really like that because now with the double edge you can see that it has all of these amazing capabilities. So not just the claw, but that back edge, when I flip it over, actually can cut. So when it is in this Ginunting grip, you can see that it can have that ring, and that ring helps with retention not only in the Ginunting grip but also in the P-call grip. And that's what I really love about the versatility of the karambit. One of the things I don't love about it is the fact that even though it's a big karambit, it cannot actually cover a lot of range. So even if I move over into that P-call grip, you see how I don't really have a lot of range with it, and technically that's about a 5.5 inch blade. Now this is a 4-inch folder from Cold Steel, and it actually covers more range, but because it doesn't have a ring, I can just extend the handle and now it can touch and actually cover that gap so that it can touch the target. And not only that, if I go over into a puño grip, even the puño grip has a lot of advantages in terms of covering the range. So we have to be very realistic in terms of one of the disadvantages of the karambit, which is range management. The other disadvantage is the fact that if you're thinking it'll behave like a knife, especially if your target happens to have some stretchy fabric on it, it's gonna catch. And when it catches, whatever pattern you happen to be working with, what template you happen to be working with, really anticipate that it's going to catch on it. One of the advantages of working with a Schrade karambit is the fact that since it is double-edged, you can expect that back edge to actually slice through. So what I'm going to do here is do some of the Filipino karambit movement, where I can go ahead and use some of the puño movements, some of the catching movements, so a lot of midline movements and some of that twirling that you see with the karambit. It's something that becomes more tactically advantageous because it has that back edge. And as you can see, even in the Filipino Karambit paradigm, that flipping over actually helps transition to some of those lower body attacks, especially along the perineum and along the abdomen. So the twirling piece of it can be very offensive. So as much as it looks very acrobatic and impressive, if you're using a back edge sharpened Karambit, it really leads into these transitions wherein if you go ahead and start a pattern, when you have that twirling movement attached to it, when it twirls, all of a sudden you can attack that perineum from that standing position, which is the standard of the Filipino Karambit movements and paradigm. So again, let's take a look at it. A jab, very fast, and it can do a high-low attack, which is very standard in Filipino Karambit and Filipino Kali altogether. Varying your attacks from high and low is what makes Filipino martial arts really effective, because when you switch over, all of a sudden you confuse the opponent. I'm now going to work with the Cold Steel Tiger Claw. And the Cold Steel Tiger Claw is one of my favorites for many reasons. One of which is because even though you have a folder that can technically cover much more range, the Cold Steel Tiger Claw is designed as such so that it has a slightly longer handle. It can cover that much more range because I can push up on it, I can hold the bottom of it, and now because of that Warncliffe design, it can actually start to cut through. This is why the Cold Steel Tiger Claw is my favorite Karambit design, because Lynn Thompson and Andrew Demko made those changes so that it can cover more length and it can actually cut through. So as you can see, I'm holding it in that Ginunting grip, and it's actually cutting through, not cutting through the material, but really moving through the material. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the browse folder. The browse folder actually catches because it's designed more traditionally. Now let's take a look at the Cold Steel Tiger Claw and how it flows with me. This is my favorite because I've been working with the Cold Steel Tiger Claw for a very long time, and as you can see, it flows very well in the Filipino Karambit paradigm. But as you can see with the chopping movements where my body is pretty straight up, when I go ahead and change levels and I start to use more of that Silat paradigm, it moves very well there also. When I flip down and go for that perineum and I get really low, when I get really low here with the Tiger Claw, I can start to cut the sartorius, the medial aspect of the knee, anything in the lower targets, because that's where the Silat paradigm really falls under. So what makes it really dangerous is the fact that it can do standing attacks and lower body attacks, and then when you do that flip over, it can do all types of damage to every part of the body that a normal knife cannot normally get to. So when we go ahead and do this practice flow, some of those targets can actually be the arm, and look how it does the kind of targeting on the arm. So one of the things I like is when you do that flip over and it happens to catch, you can re-grip it so that it goes right through the elbow. So when I do this flow with those flip overs, you'll see that when I go into that lower body attack, then move on into the limb attack, when I go into that limb attack, you'll start to see that that flip over moves really well, because once I re-grip it, it goes right through into the next flow. So what's critical to the fluidity of the Karambit comes down to that flip over, but also deciding which paradigm you're going to be using, whether you're going to be using the Filipino paradigm where you are going ahead and standing straight, or you're going to use the Silat paradigm where you are not only getting low, but you're also going ahead and attacking the midline with a specific target towards the perineum. And now what you're going to see here is that some of the attacks are actually going to start to include kicking from Sikaran. You also see it in Silat, but some of those lower body kicks or sweeps that you see in Silat has a lot to do with the setup of the crash, wherein the practitioner can go ahead and start to attack the midline, but by attacking the lower legs first, either with a sweep, a foot stomp, or a kick. So what you'll see me do here is crash, and once I crash, I actually start it with an entry with my feet, with my kicks, and then once I get in, I can use that Karambit with a lower body attack, and once I do that, I can go right up the midline starting at the perineum. I really hope that this video gives you a much better understanding of how complex the Karambit is, because it bridges two very critical methodologies, and that is the Filipino Karambit methodology and the Indonesian Silat methodology. You can see how much I enjoy moving with it, and I really enjoy the practice of it because it is really bridging the gap between these two fantastic martial arts. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. It's something that you learned a lot from. Stick around, stay tuned, more videos to come.